For more than 50 years, Dale Evans stood faithfully beside one of America's most beloved Western heroes. She smiled for the cameras, sang before cheering crowds, and shared messages of faith that inspired millions of fans across the country. To the public, her life appeared calm, joyful, and complete. But as the years passed and the final chapters of her life approached, that carefully maintained image began to show small cracks. Behind the polished smiles and the uplifting songs were moments of quiet pain that few people ever saw. At times, powerful figures in Hollywood openly dismissed her. Some mocked her beliefs. Others treated her as if she were invisible. The woman who had inspired so many people often found herself quietly enduring disrespect from some of the biggest names in the industry. Many people would later ask the same question. Who would dare treat a beloved figure like Dale Evans as if she didn't matter? To understand the story, you have to begin with the man standing at the center of her life. Roy Rogers. To millions of Americans, Roy Rogers was more than just a movie star. He was the perfect cowboy hero. Calm, polite, and deeply moral, he represented everything families wanted their children to admire. His films and television appearances created an image of kindness and integrity that seemed almost flawless. But the private life inside their home was not always as simple as the one audiences saw on screen. Roy Rogers believed strongly in discipline and structure. Inside the household, he often expected his decisions to be final. Parenting choices, family matters, and daily routines usually followed his direction. For Dale Evans, this sometimes created a quiet tension. Years later, she admitted that there were moments when she felt more like a guest in her own home than an equal partner. She understood how much their public image meant to millions of fans, and she was determined to protect that image, even when doing so required silence. One particular memory stayed with her for decades. During a disagreement about how one of their adopted children should be disciplined, Roy ended the discussion abruptly in front of the entire family. His decision was final, and the conversation stopped immediately. The room fell silent. Dale did not argue. She didn't challenge him in front of the children. Instead, she simply accepted the moment and allowed the subject to end. Not because she agreed, but because she believed pushing back could damage the image of unity surrounding their family. Years later, when she finally spoke about that moment, she described it carefully. Roy Rogers, she said, was gentle with the world. But inside the home, gentleness did not always guide every moment. Her words were not spoken with anger. They carried something closer to quiet release after years of holding her feelings inside. Much of the tension between them came from grief. The couple experienced devastating losses, including the deaths of their daughters Robin and Debbie. Roy dealt with pain by tightening control over his world. Dale, however, longed for emotional openness and shared vulnerability. The two never fully met in the middle. She never left him. And while he was alive, she never publicly criticized him. But privately, the emotional distance remained. When Roy Rogers died in 1998, those unspoken feelings remained unresolved. Another powerful figure who left a lasting impression on Dale Evans was John Wayne. At the time, Wayne was one of the most dominant personalities in Hollywood. His voice filled rooms. His confidence commanded attention, and he rarely hesitated to turn a social gathering into a stage for his humor. Dale Evans was very different. She was quiet, thoughtful, and openly guided by her faith. She never tried to dominate a conversation or impress a room full of industry executives. In environments where John Wayne thrived, her calm presence stood in sharp contrast. And Wayne noticed. One evening in the late 1940s, a crowded studio gathering brought the two personalities together. When someone offered Dale Evans a drink, she politely declined. Later, when the conversation shifted toward crude jokes, she quietly stepped away. The gesture was small and respectful, but John Wayne saw it. Lifting his glass high enough for people nearby to hear, he spoke loudly. "God doesn't make movies," he said. "Men do." Laughter spread through the room exactly as Wayne expected. But Dale Evans did not laugh. She stood silently for a moment, then calmly picked up her purse and walked out of the gathering. Her quiet exit said more than any argument could have. Years later, she explained that she never feared disagreement. What hurt her was being turned into a public spectacle. The laughter, the attention, the feeling of being singled out, that was the wound that stayed with her. After that night, she avoided John Wayne whenever possible. There were no public feuds and no dramatic confrontations. She simply kept her distance. Another encounter that left a lasting impression involved one of Hollywood's most legendary stars, Clark Gable. Gable possessed a different kind of power. He rarely insulted anyone openly. Instead, he had a way of making people feel invisible. From the first days they worked on the same set, Dale noticed something unusual. Gable rarely greeted her and seldom acknowledged her presence unless the camera required it. During rehearsals, he would quietly speak with the director, suggesting small adjustments to blocking and camera angles. Slowly, those changes pushed Dale farther toward the edge of the frame. The crew noticed the pattern, but no one intervened. Gable's influence in Hollywood was enormous, and many people had learned not to question his preferences. One day, during a scene they were filming together, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The cameras rolled. The dialogue flowed naturally. Then suddenly, in the middle of the take, Clark Gable stopped speaking. He glanced at his sleeve, looked briefly toward the lights above the set, and simply walked away. There was no explanation, no apology. The entire set fell silent. After several long minutes, an assistant director approached Dale and explained that the scene would be reset. But when filming resumed, something had changed. The new version removed Gable from the moment entirely. The camera stayed focused on Dale. Later, she learned that such behavior was not unusual. If a scene did not highlight Gable in the way he preferred, it often changed. Years afterward, Dale described the experience with one simple sentence. "He didn't insult me," she said. "He simply made me irrelevant." To her, that quiet erasure represented something deeper about Hollywood. Women were not always silenced through harsh words. Sometimes they were simply ignored. Another figure whose actions affected her career was Gene Autry. Unlike others who displayed their hostility openly, Autry's influence worked quietly behind the scenes. There were no public arguments, no harsh exchanges, just subtle changes that slowly reshaped her opportunities. By the time Dale Evans rose to fame alongside Roy Rogers, Autry had already established himself as a major figure in Western entertainment. Her growing popularity did not necessarily appear harmless to him. It looked like competition. At first, the changes were subtle. Scripts that once arrived regularly stopped appearing. Radio invitations were postponed. Projects quietly disappeared without explanation. Individually, these moments seemed minor. Together, they formed a clear pattern. Eventually, a producer admitted what others had only hinted at. "Gene doesn't want you getting too big," he said. The remark struck her deeply. She realized Autry wasn't confronting Roy Rogers directly. Instead, his quiet influence was limiting her. Years later, she reflected on the experience with a simple observation. Open enemies never frightened her. The quiet ones did. But perhaps the most painful moment came from someone many Americans trusted to make them laugh. Bob Hope. Hope's humor had comforted audiences for years, especially during difficult times. At first, Dale Evans held no resentment toward him. But that changed during a televised appearance. In the middle of one of his routines, Hope made a joke about a holy cowgirl, describing a woman so perfectly pure that she seemed almost manufactured. The implication was clear. He was talking about Dale Evans. The audience laughed on cue. But Dale did not laugh. She simply lowered her gaze and waited quietly for the segment to end. Later, someone from the production staff suggested that Bob Hope probably meant no harm. Dale answered calmly. She believed he knew exactly what he was doing. And the situation became even more painful when Hope repeated the same joke at another event, delivering the line with even sharper emphasis. For Dale Evans, faith was not a costume or a stage prop. It had carried her through the most devastating losses of her life, including the deaths of her daughters. Hearing that faith turned into a punchline felt deeply personal. Yet she never confronted Bob Hope. She didn't demand an apology. She didn't criticize him publicly. Instead, she responded in the quietest way possible. She simply stopped appearing anywhere he was present. Invitations connected to him went unanswered. Joint appearances became impossible. When friends asked why, she gave a brief explanation. She did not laugh at the things that helped people survive their hardest moments. Bob Hope never apologized. And Dale Evans never publicly complained. But the silence she carried throughout her life revealed something important about the woman behind the public smile. She endured more than most people realized. And even in the face of disrespect from some of Hollywood's most powerful men, she chose dignity over confrontation. That quiet strength may have been her greatest legacy of all. If you love the scandals, rivalries, and secrets behind Hollywood's biggest legends, subscribe to Hollywood Feuds.